Chapter 386. Su Dongpa had once said, "It's lonely at the top." Although my cultivation base wasn't high, I could see much more than ordinary people. Thus, the road of cultivation was destined to be lonely. On this road, Tong Tong was the one who had accompanied me the whole time, and then Xiao Jin. Thinking about it, Xiao Jin came to my side much later than Tong Tong. However, when I first met Xiao Jin, I had a strange feeling. It was as though he had some sort of deep connection with me in the unseen world. Although I couldn't figure out why I had this feeling, Xiao Jin's position in my heart was the same as Tong Tong's. Moreover, it was my idea to arrange for Xiao Jin to hide in the ravine. That was why I was worried and blamed myself. After thinking for a long time, I couldn't come up with an idea. I had to use the stupid method to expand the area and search around. I was busy until the sky turned dark. I had searched the area within 10 kilometers of the ravine. However, I couldn't find any suspicious traces, let alone Xiao Jin. I even called Tong Tong out of the jade bracelet and asked her and the little zombie to check the situation in the distance. However, just like me, they didn't find any trace of Xiao Jin. In the end, Tong Tong persuaded me to give up the idea of expanding the search area. I pondered for a while, then brought Tong Tong back to the hotel. Xiao Jin was missing. It was a fact that I had to search around like a headless fly. It wasn't a good thing for anyone. I had to return to the hotel and calm down first. Then I could come up with a plan. On the way back, my mind was still in a mess. Fortunately, Tong Tong was very considerate. She sat next to me and comforted me, which made me feel better. It was late at night when I returned to the hotel. I went to check on Zhang Canwen first. After confirming that he was all right, I returned to my room. As soon as I entered the room, I frowned. With my current cultivation base, as long as I memorized the appearance of a certain place, I would be able to detect it as soon as it changed. That day, when I left for the mausoleum of the king of the Shang dynasty, I took note of the room's condition and told the hotel's front desk not to let the waiters clean the room. However, at this moment, I found that the bed in the room was slightly different from when I left. Before I left, I had asked the attendant to clean up the bed. The bed sheets were newly changed, and there were no signs of someone pressing on them. However, there were obvious traces of someone sitting on the bedside near the headboard. During this time, someone must have come to my room. It was unlikely that the staff didn't pay attention to my request and accidentally barged in. Because the staff only came in to clean, it was impossible for them to sit by the bed and rest. Then who could it be? Puzzled, I walked over and lowered my head to check the mark. However, as soon as I walked over and lowered my head, I saw a note next to the pillow. The note was as white as snow, and it was the same color as the pillow and the bedsheet. It wasn't obvious, and my attention was attracted by the mark on the bed, so I didn't notice it. This note didn't belong to my room. For the time being, I didn't care about the mark. I picked up the note and opened it. There was a line of crooked words on the note. "Master, I have something to do. I have to leave now. I will come back to see you later." It was just a simple line of words, and there was no signature. However, I recognized that it was Xiao Jin's note. Except for him, no one else would call me master. Now, I knew why Xiao Jin wasn't in that valley. I felt a little relieved. However, at the same time, I had more questions. Ever since Xiao Jin had been with me, besides transforming twice a month, he had only done two things. One was to use the true dragon chi in the jade bracelet to cultivate, and the other was to be in a daze. He had never mentioned anything to me, and he didn't talk much. I always felt that he was like a little zombie. Every day, he was ignorant and didn't think about anything. But now, he told me that he had something to do with my relationship with him. If it wasn't something important, he would definitely give me a chance to say goodbye in person. But what was it that made Xiao Jin leave in such a hurry? I couldn't figure it out, even after thinking for a long time. I was more worried than before when I couldn't find him. Tong Tong seemed to read my mind. She leaned on my shoulder and hugged my arm coquettishly. Brother, Xiao Jin is very smart. He has his reasons for doing something. You don't need to worry too much. Moreover, he's a Tai Sui. Although he doesn't have any power, he has the body of a Tai Sui. People with a low cultivation base can't hurt him, even if he suffers any losses. As long as he waits for the time it takes for him to transform, Little Gold will be able to easily escape. Tong Tong's analysis was right. After all, Xiao Jin was Tai Sui. With just the strength of his body, cultivators below the Heaven Master level could not break through his body's defense. Even if the Heaven Master could break through his defense, it was basically impossible to kill him. As long as he wasn't killed, no matter how strong the enemy was, they wouldn't be able to withstand one slap from Xiao Jin. With this analysis, Xiao Jin wouldn't be in trouble. But I didn't know why I was so scared. I couldn't loosen my tense mind. I sighed and said to Tong Tong, I hope so. Then I reached out and smoothed the seat marks on the bed. I lifted the quilt and was ready to sleep. These days in the mausoleum of the Yinshang dynasty, my nerves had been stretched taut. When I finally killed Lu Ziang, I had gone through a fierce battle. At this moment, my body and spirit had long been exhausted to the extreme. Chapter 387. Time passed very slowly while I was in a state of battle. Tong Tong's love song seemed to have been sung for 60 years before it faded away. Only then did I let out a sigh of relief. My tense mind calmed down a little. Tong Tong didn't seem to notice my embarrassment. After she finished singing, she leaned on my shoulder and whispered to me, Gidge, are you feeling better? I nodded. I'm feeling much better. Tong Tong's worry turned into joy. She chuckled and rubbed her head against my chest. She asked in a lazy voice, It's so comfortable to lie down like this. Is this the feeling of sleeping? I've never slept before. Gidge, can I sleep with you? Her words had a lot of ambiguity, which made people's imagination run wild. However, after hearing her words, the feeling in my heart suddenly disappeared. Tong Tong said that she had never slept before. Yes, sleeping was something that only humans needed. Ghosts didn't need it. Although Tong Tong had become a ghost child by chance, and her growth and development were no different from a human's, she wasn't a human after all. Moreover, she had never experienced what it felt like to be a human. I suddenly felt distressed. I couldn't help but turn around and hug Tong Tong. I said to her gently, Silly, this isn't the feeling of sleeping. It's just resting. Sleeping is not doing anything. You don't think about anything. Just empty yourself. Try it. Come, close your eyes. Slowly. I wanted to ask her to breathe slowly, but I remembered that Tong Tong didn't breathe. I kept silent for a while and didn't say anything. I just hugged Tong Tong tighter. Tong Tong didn't think too much. She still had a smile on her face. She closed her eyes and seemed to really fall asleep. I also closed my eyes and breathed slowly. After a long time, I still didn't fall asleep. I lowered my head to look at Tong Tong. I couldn't help but think of a question. It would be great if Tong Tong was a human. Of course, there was also Tao Wu. I thought that I didn't reject their identities, but there were some things that I always wanted to make more perfect. Thinking about this, I had an intense thought. Could I use Xian techniques to turn Tong Tong and Tao Wu into humans? Yin and Yang are different paths. That is the truth of the world, even for a cultivator like me. Based on the Tao techniques that I have come into contact with so far, there is no possibility of changing Yin and Yang. However, During this trip to the Inshang Royal Mausoleum, I heard from the celestial masters about realms such as Rush Lift and Sunset Lift. It is obvious that these realms are far higher than the Yangshan Celestial Master. The mysterious technique of the Yang God Celestial Master is already amazing enough. The power of a higher level must be even more powerful. If I have that kind of cultivation in the future, it might not be impossible to reverse yin and yang. As I thought of this, the tiredness that I had accumulated earlier slowly washed over me. I slowly closed my eyes and fell asleep. I fell into a deep sleep. When I woke up, it was already the afternoon of the second day. The moment I opened my eyes, I saw Tong Tong looking at me with her large eyes. Her body was still the same as the night before, nestled in my embrace. At this moment, I no longer had the romantic thoughts from last night. I sat up with a smile and lovingly rubbed Tong Tong's head. I asked her, "Did you just accompany me for a night? Why didn't you return to the jade bracelet to cultivate?" Tong Tong stuck out her tongue and sat up from the bed. She softly smiled and said, "It's very comfortable to sleep with brother. I don't want to return to the jade bracelet to cultivate. Brother, from now on, when you sleep every night, I will accompany you to sleep, okay?" I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Tong Tong was innocent and didn't feel that there was anything wrong with what she said. However, I couldn't help but think of the awkwardness from last night. I didn't know if I should agree or reject her. After hesitating for a long time, I lowered my head and looked at Tong Tong's expectant gaze. I really couldn't bear to reject her. In the end, I nodded and agreed. Tong Tong softly cheered. She straightened her body on the bed and moved next to me. She quickly kissed my cheek. Then, with a shy expression, she didn't say anything and returned to the jade bracelet with a flash of her body. Her action stunned me again. Why did Tong Tong kiss me? Is she really as innocent and naive as I thought? I sat on the bed and kept silent for a while. I smiled wryly and shook my head. I didn't know much about relationships, so I didn't want to think too much about it. I would just let nature take its course. There was no need to worry about nothing. After I got up, I washed my face and rinsed my mouth. I remembered that Zhang Canwen couldn't take care of himself due to his injuries. It was already afternoon. I guessed that he hadn't had a meal that day. I quickly went to his room. Yesterday, because I had to take care of Zhang Canwen, I specifically went to the front desk of the hotel to get a room card for his room. I didn't knock on the door and directly used the card to open the door. When I entered the room, I saw that Zhang Canwen's room was empty. He wasn't in the room. My complexion instantly changed. Zhang Canwen's injuries weren't light. Although he could barely move his body and walking would only delay the recovery of his injuries. It was unlikely that Zhang Canwen would go out on his own. Could it be that he had been kidnapped? But I had never heard that Zhang Canwen had a grudge against anyone. Even if he had an enemy, it wouldn't be a coincidence that they found him at this time, right? After learning from Xiao Jin's disappearance yesterday, I didn't hurry to search around. I went to Zhang Canwen's room to check. Sure enough, he found some clues with this inspection. Zhang Canwen's luggage was still in his room. This proved that he didn't leave on his own like Xiao Jin. Moreover, there was no sign of a fight in the room. I closed my eyes to sense, but I didn't find any trace of Dao energy. Although Zhang Canwen was injured, he couldn't have been kidnapped by an ordinary person. If he had been kidnapped, the culprit would have used a Dao technique and left some clues. I felt strange. I hesitated for a while and was about to go to the front desk to ask about the situation. Right at this moment, the door opened. Zhang Canwen pushed it open and walked in. Seeing me in the room, Zhang Canwen was bewildered. Then he walked toward me. I heaved a sigh of relief. I got up and asked, Brother Jean, how are your injuries? Why did you go out alone? Jean Camlin's face was still pale. He shook his head and said, My injuries are fine, but I still can't use my Tao energy. It won't be a problem for me to walk around. I guessed that he had some kind of healing medicine. Seeing that he was fine, I relaxed. I sat on the side of his bed and smiled at him. Since you are fine, let's hurry back. In the royal tomb, I killed Lu Ziang. The Lu family will definitely rush here in 2 to 3 days. If they find me, it will be troublesome. Jean Camlin shook his head. He had a strange expression on his face, as though he still had some lingering fear. He opened his mouth and said to me in a low voice, The Lu family is here. What? I was shocked and quickly sat up on the bed. At the same time, I circulated the shaman energy in my body and looked behind Jean Canwin. In the end, there was no one behind Jean Canwin. I relaxed a little and asked him, What happened? How did you know that the Lu family is here? Jean Canwin shook his head and didn't answer my question. He turned and walked toward the door. He said to me, Follow me. I hesitated. In the end, I felt that Jean Canwin wouldn't harm me since we had been through thick and thin together for so long. So I followed him out. After we went out, Jean Canwin quickly led the way. We left the hotel and headed toward the direction of the Yinshang Royal Tomb. Jean Canwin stopped when we reached the Yinshang Royal Tomb Ruins Museum. I lifted my head and was shocked. The entrance of the museum was surrounded by a group of people. There were also many policemen walking back and forth. There was also a circle of police tape at the entrance. I didn't understand, so I asked Jean Canwin what happened. Jean Canwin didn't answer me directly. Instead, he pointed at a window next to the entrance that was also surrounded by a group of people. He said to me, You can see the situation inside from there. I was full of doubts. I easily squeezed through the crowd and went to the window to take a look. Immediately, I was dumbfounded. Chapter 388. I was completely dumbfounded. There were a total of 18 celestial masters. Excluding the 7 celestial masters who died in the hands of the evil sacrificial spirit, there were still 11 celestial masters. Among these 11 celestial masters, there were 8 young god celestial masters, including President Gu and Zhang Daozhang from Mount Longhu. Yesterday, I didn't even dare to kill President Gu. Who would have thought that they would all be killed today? If this news spread out, the entire metaphysics world would be in chaos. Whether it was the Metaphysics Society or Mount Longhu, they would all be shocked. But who did it? I didn't think much as Nangong's figure appeared in my head after leaving the royal tomb yesterday. Only the celestial masters and Nangong were left in the sacrificial hall. Moreover, Nangong told me that his cultivation base had recovered a little. From this point, it seemed that besides Nangong, there was no one else. But if Nangong wanted to kill them, why did he have to send me away first? I didn't have any friendship with these people. To some extent, there was hatred between us. If Nangong insisted on killing them, I would have raised both of my hands to support him. Moreover, even if Nangong sent me away to kill them, why did he have to bring their corpses out in public? Wouldn't it be better to let these people rot in the sacrificial hall? There must be something strange going on. As I thought about it, I suddenly realized a serious problem. If the murderer wasn't Nangong, where was he now? Would he be in danger? Although he had said that he had recovered a little bit of his cultivation base, he wasn't at his peak condition. If someone was hiding in the sacrificial hall, would they also attack Nangong after killing these celestial masters? As I thought about it, I carefully checked. In that pile of flesh and blood, many corpses had turned into broken pieces. Moreover, they were piled up together. it was possible that some people that I couldn't see were buried under them. In other words, was Nangong also in that pile of corpses? I was very anxious and hated that I couldn't rush in to check. However, there were a lot of people watching, and the lobby was full of policemen. I didn't dare to act rashly and could only stand there anxiously. After waiting for a while, I saw that the policemen didn't seem to want to dig up the pile of corpses. I thought for a moment and squeezed out of the crowd. I turned around to find Jean Canwin and asked him worriedly, "What happened?" Jean Canwin shook his head with a solemn expression. "I don't know either. It's just that I heard a lot of people making a ruckus here at noon. I even heard someone shouting someone's dead. So I came out to check it out of curiosity. Then I saw this scene. I frowned and stayed silent for a while. Then I asked, 'What did you mean when you said that the Liu family is here?' Nangong pointed at the museum ruins and asked curiously, 'Didn't you see the Liu family in the museum ruins?' I was bewildered. I was scared by the corpses, so I didn't pay attention to see who was in the museum. Nangong seemed to see through my thoughts and continued, 'When I came over to check on the situation, I saw 3 people from the Liu family walk in. One of them was the Liu Chingy we met last time. They should still be inside.' My heart shivered. The Liu family couldn't have come after receiving the news that all the heavenly masters were dead. They couldn't be that fast. They must have rushed here because of Liu Xiang's death, but they just happened to see this scene. The Liu family must have come here to find the murderer who killed Liu Xiang. According to what Liu Xiang said that day, the Liu family might already know that I was the one who did it. I stayed silent for a while and didn't take the risk to confirm the Liu family's identity. Instead, I asked Zhang Canwin another question that I was more concerned about. 'When you found the pile of corpses, did you see Nangong?' Zhang Canwin shook his head and quickly asked me, 'Do you think it was Nangong who did it?' It was obvious that he had the same thought as me. He felt that it was very likely that Nangong killed these people. Actually, I had asked him if he had seen Nangong's corpse, but he had answered my question at least. I let out a breath of relief. As long as Nangong wasn't dead, it didn't matter to me whether Nangong killed these people or not. After staying silent for a while, I turned to look at Zhang Canwin and said, 'The Liu family is already here, and the one leading them is Liu Chingy. I can't stay here any longer. Let's leave immediately. What do you think?' Zhang Canwin didn't hesitate and immediately nodded. 'Leaving is the best option. Although the situation is different, if the Liu family can confirm that you killed Liu Xiang, they might put the blame on you for the deaths of the others. Moreover, it's unlikely that I will be able to get away from it. At that time, the entire Metaphysics Association will be in an uproar. It's too dangerous to stay here. Let's not waste any more time and leave immediately.' After getting his agreement, I didn't say anything else. I immediately turned around and headed back to the hotel with him. When we arrived outside our room, Zhang Canwin and I packed our luggage separately and returned to our own rooms. As soon as I entered the room, I was stunned again. Nangong was sitting at the head of my bed. I didn't react in time. I looked at him blankly and didn't say anything for a long time. In the end, Nangong chuckled and asked me, 'What's wrong? Were you shocked after seeing the corpses of the Heaven's Masters?' I gulped and calmed down a little. I quickly asked him, 'Those people, did you kill them?' Nangong smiled and shook his head. 'I didn't kill them.' I heaved a sigh of relief, but at the same time, I was even more confused. 'If you didn't kill them, then they must have been killed by someone else. There are other people hiding in the spring sacrifice hall. How did you escape?' Nangong looked at me thoughtfully before asking me with a smile, 'What's wrong? You don't believe me?' I opened my mouth, but before I could reply, Nangong smiled and waved his hand. Actually, I don't know how they died either. After all of you left yesterday, I got those people to follow you and leave while I search for an item in the spring sacrifice hall. It wasn't until this morning that I finally succeeded. When I came out from the underground, I discovered that all of them were dead. As for how they died, I'm as confused as you are. With my status and relationship with Nangong, there was no need for him to lie to me. Thus, I immediately believed his words and smiled wryly, even though we didn't kill them. If the Liu family knew that I killed Liu Ziyang, I'm afraid that the deaths of the others will be blamed on me. I'm afraid that I won't be able to hide from them, even if I hide at the ends of the earth. Nangong nodded. That's right. I'm afraid that the entire metaphysics world will be frantically searching for you. What do you intend to do? To be honest, I had an idea at this moment, which was to escape to the Fire God Temple to look for Bai-En. Even though with her cultivation, it wasn't possible for her to deal with the entire metaphysics world. However, that place was very secretive, and the people from the metaphysics world wouldn't be able to find it for the time being. Nangong also knew about Bai-En, so I didn't hide it from him and told him what I had in mind. Nangong nodded. That's a good idea, but it's not a long-term plan. How about this? You go there for a few days first. After I've prepared myself, I'll bring you to a safe place. What do you think? A safe place? I looked at Nangong and asked him where exactly it was. Nangong shook his head. I can't tell you for the time being. After saying that, he stood up from the bed and pointed at a wooden box on the bed. That's right. This is the item that I've been looking for in the sacrificial hall. Didn't I say that I was looking for it for you last time? Here, I'll give it to you. After saying that, he patted his butt and left the room just like before. After he left, I walked over and picked up the wooden box to take a look. I was instantly shocked. The wooden box looked extremely simple and unadorned. There were some complicated veined patterns engraved on it. Moreover, each of the veined patterns hid an extremely astonishing aura of Tao Qi. I had only stared at one of the veined patterns for a while, but my heart was already filled with fear. It was as though the veined patterns hid a monstrous killing intent that made me shudder. Moreover, the most important thing wasn't the engraved veined patterns, but the 3 ancient characters in the middle of the wooden box. Demon Emperor Feng had acquired the power of primal chaos in the mountain and sea realm, then borrowed the bloodline of the daughter of Shinnong to escape alone and invade the world of men. The Xianyuan clan was defeated and died. The Gao Xian clan borrowed the power of the Xianyuan sword and merged with the demon Darch Qi as one. His descendants absorbed all the chaos in the world to weaken the demon Thearka's power. During the Zhou dynasty, King Wen made a divination, and the demon Emperor Qi and Gao Xian family finally passed away. The calamity of the human world was eliminated, and civilization began to flourish. After I finished reading, I was dumbfounded. What was Nangong's intention in writing so many words about ancient history? Although he mentioned the Yellow Emperor, what did these things have to do with the suspected Xianyuan sword he left behind? I couldn't figure it out. I lowered my head and studied for a long time, but I still couldn't figure it out. The ancient Chinese legends were complicated. Although I was interested in history, I only knew that the Xianyuan clan was the Yellow Emperor and the Shinnong clan was the Yen Emperor. As for the Gao Xian clan and the monster Darch Qi, I had never heard of them. I put the note down and pondered for a while. Then I picked up my phone and started to search for the Gao Xian clan and the monster Darch Qi. Before I could find the answer, Zhang Kenwen pushed the door open and came in. I'm ready. You can leave at any time. How are things here? He interrupted me, and I remembered why I had hurried back here. Although I was curious, Anyang City was too dangerous at this moment. I didn't dare to linger. I quickly packed up and left with the little zombie. We checked out of the hotel. Jean Camwin's wounds had healed well. Not only could he walk, but he could also drive. After we left the hotel, everything was the same. Jean Camwin drove while the little zombie and I sat in the back seat. We left Anyang City and headed to the south. In the car, I had time to check my phone again. I continued to search for the Gao Xian clan and the monster Tharch Chi. After a quick search, I found that the Gao Xian clan was Emperor Ku, one of the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors. According to the legends, Emperor Ku was the Yellow Emperor's great-grandson. It was the same as what Nan Gong had written on the note. I checked Emperor Ku's information for a while, but didn't find anything. I continued to search for the monster Tharch Chi, but I found a person called Emperor Ku. The information on this person wasn't as complete as that of Emperor Ku. After searching for a long time, historians and mythologists couldn't come to a conclusion about his identity. They said that he was actually Xiaohao, and then they said that he was the same person as Emperor Ku. There were all kinds of theories. Instead, it was closely related to me, who came here unintentionally. It was said that there was heaven's will in the unseen world. Could this be the so-called heaven's will? The path of cultivation was not only about cultivation, but also about one's state of mind. The word heaven's will is enough to make every cultivator feel awe. I am the same. But what I don't understand is, if all of this is heaven's will, then what is my mission? Everything had a cause, even heaven's will. After the heavenly revelation, there must be a mandate of heaven. If God had given me such a revelation, then what was the mandate of heaven that he wanted to give me? Confucius said, "Know the mandate of heaven at the age of 50. It was originally a mocking and elegant way of saying it. It meant that when people reached the age of 50, they would generally have diseases. When the weather changed, the parts of the body that had the disease would sense it. This was the so-called know the mandate of heaven. Of course, this was just the surface. The deeper meaning was that after knowing the mandate of heaven, people were powerless to change the result. Thus, the original meaning of know the mandate of heaven had a strong meaning of accept the mandate of heaven. At this time, I also thought of the meaning of accept the mandate of heaven. People always said, heaven's will is hard to go against. It was clear that heaven's will couldn't be resisted by ordinary people. Thus, I was very afraid. Everyone's understanding of power was different. A teenager might think that he was the strongest person in the world, but when he reached his 20s, he wouldn't have such a thought. Of course, it wasn't because his power had deteriorated. On the contrary, as he grew older, his power actually increased. The reason why he had such a thought was because his vision had increased along with his power. He could see further and more powerful people. That was why people always said, the older you are in Jianghu, the more timid you become. It was the same for cultivators. When I was in the dragon-seeking realm, I saw the heavenly masters and felt that the power of the human world had reached its limit. But now, especially after I saw so many heavenly masters die under the hands of the evil spirits, I realized that the power of the heavenly masters was weak and insignificant. This was only the power of humans. If I raised my head and looked up at the sky, I would feel even more insignificant. To cultivators, the mandate of heaven wasn't something illusory, but it was something concrete. The Buddhists had epiphanies, while the Taoists and mystics also had Tianqi. To some extent, this trip to the royal tomb of the Shang dynasty was my Tianqi. With these thoughts in mind, I didn't say a word the entire way. When we reached the border of Hubei, I called Zhang Canwen to stop the car and let him drive back. I brought the little zombie to the Shenangjia scenic area. Before I got off the car, I was worried about Zhang Kanwen's situation. He told me that he would find a place to live in seclusion after returning to Guangdong. He would use the ancient book of the Song of Righteousness to hide his aura. It wouldn't be easy for people in the metaphysics world to find him. I was relieved. Without hesitation, I quickly headed in the direction of the Fire God Temple. Calculating the time, it had already exceeded the half a year that I had agreed on with Tao Wu. She had been living in the Fire God Temple all year round, so she was probably anxious. That was why I was traveling at a fast speed. With my current cultivation base, it only took me half a day to pass through the scenic area and a large primitive forest to reach the Fire God Temple. The Fire God Temple's hidden mechanism was still there. With my power, I couldn't force my way in. When I arrived, I stood by the river where the fatty had performed his divination. I looked at the emptiness in front of me and didn't say a word. The opening of the Fire God Temple required a special method from the people of the divination faction. I naturally didn't have that ability, according to my original agreement with Tao Wu. When I returned here again, I just had to call out her name. She would sense it and help me open the Fire God Temple. However, I was clear that there was definitely a connection between me and the Fire God Temple. That was why I didn't call out to Tao Wu and simply looked at her. If all of this was a revelation from the heavens, why would Tao Wu need to open the door for me? As expected, in just a few seconds, a lustrous light appeared in front of me. The mountain range in the distance disappeared and was replaced by a majestic main hall. Looking at the 3 words Fire God Temple, my heart started beating faster. The first time I came here, I couldn't enter even after using all of my strength. At that time, I felt that it was weird. Now, it seemed that the silver-eyed person had said that the timing wasn't right and that I had come too early. Although I had entered the second time, it was through a different method. I didn't have any memories of it, so it couldn't be counted as the timing. Until this time, the timing that the silver-eyed person had mentioned might have really come. What exactly was waiting for me behind the crimson door? I took a deep breath and walked to the crimson stone steps at the entrance of the hall. Looking at the threshold in front of me, I lifted my leg without any hesitation. The resistance from before didn't appear again, and I successfully stepped onto the steps. Outside the Fire God Temple, I didn't feel anything even though I was standing at the entrance. However, the moment I entered, I felt that the air was filled with the power of fire. After the silver-eyed man finished laughing, he walked forward and stopped next to me. His eyes were still fixed on me, but his knees gave way, and he knelt on the ground. I was shocked. What did this mean? The silver-eyed man's eyes slowly moved away from my face, and his head slowly knelt on the ground. Then he finally opened his mouth and said, "Emperor Dong said that the sword spirit isn't with him, but with my father." Emperor Dong? Sword spirit? Father? Before I could react, the silver-eyed man lifted his head to look at me again. Then he quickly knelt his head on the ground 8 more times, making it 9 times. Then he stood up from the ground. Without another word, he turned and walked far away. I couldn't react to his sudden action. It wasn't until his figure disappeared into the darkness that I anxiously shouted at him, "Who am I? Who are you? Are you Shang-Chi?" Hearing my voice, the silver-eyed man suddenly stopped. He turned and said to me, "I am Shang-Chi. As for who my father is, my father knows. The chess game that has been going on for 10,000 years is only 1 step away. Take care, my father." Then he didn't turn back and disappeared into the darkness ahead. I was anxious. Just as I was about to chase after him and question him again, my vision suddenly darkened. The red light that filled the surroundings suddenly disappeared. Where was the silver-eyed man? At this moment, a delicate voice sounded in my ear. "Husband, you're back." The voice came from behind me. I quickly turned around. I didn't know where the red chair that had been behind me had gone. I even realized that I wasn't standing on the red platform, but at the entrance of the Fire God Temple. Behind me was the main entrance with the words Fire God Temple hanging on it, and was standing at the door, smiling at me. Her red wedding dress looked exceptionally bright in the dim environment. I was stunned. I clearly remembered that I had already walked into the Fire God Temple. I had even jumped onto the red platform and stood next to the red chair. But now, why was I suddenly at the entrance? Could it be that the silver-eyed man's appearance and our conversation had been a dream, just like what had happened in the sacrificial ceremony? I shook my head. I could clearly feel the dream in the sacrificial hall. Later on, I fainted and woke up after I opened my eyes. But now, I didn't even close my eyes during the whole process. How could it be a dream? I didn't believe it. I couldn't be bothered to talk to Bai, and I jumped through the door and quickly searched around. In the end, I found the room that I had stayed in with Bai, and for a few days, but I didn't find the red platform or the red chair. Bai, and had already followed me here. I turned around and asked her anxiously, "When did you come? Did you see the silver-eyed man? Do you see that scarlet chair?" Chapter 392. Even Tao Wu didn't see it. Was the appearance of the silver-eyed person really just a dream? I heaved a sigh of relief. I hadn't seen him for more than half a year and had just met him. It wouldn't be good for me to do anything else in front of Tao Wu, so I could only put the matter of the silver-eyed man aside. I smiled at Tao Wu and said, "I was supposed to come over a while ago, but I ran into some trouble and delayed it until now." Tao Wu looked at me quietly and smiled. She shook her head and said, "This is my home and also my husband's home. It doesn't make much of a difference to come back a few days earlier or later." She was still so considerate. I couldn't forget the guilt of not keeping my promise. I said apologetically, "It doesn't make much of a difference, but I still made you wait for so many days in vain." Tao Wu shook her head again. "It's fine. I've lived in seclusion in this cave for 1,000 years. Half a year has passed in a flash, and it's not much different from one day. Husband, you don't have to blame yourself." Hearing her say that, I couldn't take it to heart and couldn't help but feel sorry for her. Living in seclusion for 1,000 years. It didn't sound like much, but in reality, it was such a cruel word. I would go crazy if I stayed here alone for 3 to 5 days in such a cold and empty cave. I couldn't imagine how sad and helpless Tao Wu must have been to live alone for 1,000 years. However, why did she want to live here alone for 1,000 years? Previously, I had asked Tao Wu about her identity and why she was staying here, but she had rejected me, saying that it wasn't the right time to tell me yet. This time, even the silver-eyed person said that it was the right time. Was it time to tell me about Tao Wu's background? Thinking of this, I hurriedly asked what was on my mind. Tao Wu was stunned and didn't directly answer my question. Instead, she stared at me in a daze. After a while, she asked in a probing tone, "Husband, do you still not know my identity?" I was confused by her question and shook my head. "You haven't told me. How would I know?" Tao Wu didn't seem surprised by my answer, but her expression showed a hint of disappointment. She turned her head to the side and sighed. "Since husband hasn't remembered my identity, it proves that the time hasn't come." Hearing her words, I patted my head in annoyance. Nangong was like this, Silver I was like this, even Lao AI was like this. They all knew something about me, but I didn't. Furthermore, they didn't want to tell me, they just had to wait for the right time. We are all cultivators, so of course I know there are many taboos in many things, and I understand them very well. However, I still feel uncomfortable. I don't care who I am, and I don't care what mission they're carrying. Isn't it better to be honest and open about everything? Like now, he was solving a riddle step by step. It was too tiring. You also saved me once when I had just moved into the jade bracelet. Lao AI slightly frowned. She seemed to find it strange. She asked, "Previously?" Tong Tong nodded. "Yes, but sister didn't wear red clothes at that time. You wore white clothes." Lao AI's expression suddenly changed. She turned her head and stared at Tong Tong. She didn't speak for a long time. Tong Tong was puzzled by her gaze. She finally stopped talking and avoided Lao AI's gaze in fear. She turned her head and timidly glanced at me. At this time, I also remembered that Tong Tong and I had almost lost our lives in Professor Deng's hands. I was puzzled and asked Lao AI, "Yes, that was 6 or 7 years ago. At that time, I was fighting with a ghost owner and almost lost my life. A figure suddenly came out of the jade bracelet and drove away that person. She saved Tong Tong and my lives. At that time, my eyes were injured and I couldn't see anything. I heard from Tong Tong that the figure was also a woman wearing white clothes. Was it you?" Hearing my question, Lao AI finally spoke. She shook her head. "It wasn't me." Sure enough, it wasn't Lao AI. I was surprised and asked, "Was there someone else in the jade bracelet?" Lao AI shook her head again. "There was no one else in the jade bracelet." I was stunned. There was no one else in the jade bracelet, and the figure that appeared last time wasn't Lao AI. What was going on? I looked at Lao AI suspiciously, as I didn't understand what she meant. At this time, Lao AI also looked at me with a trace of sadness in her eyes. I was even more puzzled. What was going on? After a long moment of silence, Lao AI finally moved her eyes away from my face and said softly, "Husband, can you lend me the jade bracelet for a while?" I nodded and handed the jade bracelet to her. "This jade bracelet is yours. If you want to use it, you can take it. You don't need to ask me." Lao AI took the jade bracelet and didn't say anything. She just stared at the jade bracelet for a long time. Finally, she lifted her head and asked me, "Husband, how long will you stay this time?" Hearing her question, I smiled. "This time, I can stay longer. I won't leave for a while." I thought that Lao AI would be happy to hear this news, but she didn't smile. Instead, she sighed. Before I could ask, and said, "I have something to do. If my husband can stay here for a long time, why don't you wait for me here for a few days? After I finish that thing, I'll come back and reunite with my husband." Chapter 393. I opened my mouth, wanting to stop her and ask her what she was going to do. However, I hesitated, feeling that something was wrong. While I was hesitating, Bai had already drifted away, disappearing into the darkness around the corner in front of me. After she left, I suddenly remembered that Lao AI had previously said that she couldn't leave this underground palace. Why did she suddenly say that she was going to do something this time? Could it be that she had found a way to leave the underground palace? With that thought in mind, I glanced in the direction that Lao AI had left. I vaguely remembered that it wasn't an exit, but a deeper part of the underground palace. It seemed that what she was going to do was inside this underground palace. I was somewhat worried. In the past, I had thought that Lao AI was extremely powerful. However, this trip to the Yinshang Royal Mausoleum had broadened my horizons. I had seen many powers that were far beyond mine, and even beyond Lao AI's. In addition, the silver-eyed person that I had seen in my half-conscious state might still be here. Thus, after thinking for a while, I decided to follow Lao AI to take a look. She didn't look well when she left. If something were to happen, I would regret it. After making up my mind, I asked Tong Tong to wait here while I hurried in the direction Bayan had gone. I was somewhat familiar with the paths in the fire god temple, so I walked quickly. However, after walking for more than 10 minutes, I still couldn't find Lao Ai at a fork in the road in front of me. For such a large building, once you took the wrong turn, you would be heading in the opposite direction. I had no choice but to stop and search around, wanting to see if I could find any traces of Lao Ai. In the end, after searching for a long time, I couldn't find even the slightest clue. I couldn't determine which path Lao Ai had taken. I sat down on a stone bench at the fork and pondered for a while. Just now, Lao Ai had told me to wait for a few days. It was obvious that she would need a lot of time. Judging from the current situation, she shouldn't be leaving this underground palace. Although this underground palace was large, it would take at most a few hours to walk back and forth. It definitely wouldn't take a few days. From this, I could deduce that she would need to spend a lot of time on what she wanted to do. A task that required a lot of time was either extremely troublesome or extremely dangerous. After analyzing the situation, I became even more anxious. I wandered around the three-forked road for 2 hours. In the end, I checked the time. It was already night time. I was worried that something bad would happen to Tong Tong if he stayed there alone. Begrudgingly, I went back the way I had come. When I turned around, Tong Tong was just as I had expected. She was standing at the door of the room, looking in my direction. Her eyes were filled with anxiety and worry. When she saw me, she heaved a sigh of relief. The worry in her eyes instantly disappeared. She ran to my side, grabbed my arm, and asked, "Brother, did you find Sister Red Shadow?" I rubbed her head and shook my head. "No, but she lives here all year round. There shouldn't be any problems. We don't have to worry too much. Let's stay here for now." Tong Tong was as obedient as ever. She nodded and said softly, "Okay." After returning to the room, Tong Tong naturally tidied up the bed and spread the blanket. Then she softly said to me, "Brother, it's getting late. Let's go to bed." There was only one bed in Tong Tong's room. The last time I stayed here, I slept on the same bed with her. However, I was seriously injured at that time, and my mind was constantly thinking about the outside world. Nothing happened between me and Tong Tong. Tong Tong told me last night that she liked to experience the feeling of sleeping. She wanted to sleep like a normal human every night. She wanted to sleep with me every night. It was a very humble wish. Tong Tong died when she was born. She had never experienced anything like a human. So, when she made this request, I couldn't refuse. But now, as I looked at Tong Tong's bed, I didn't feel good. Tong Tong was very pure. She didn't have any lust in her heart, but I was different from her. What's more, I did have a moment of lust last night. Although it was just a moment of absurdity, and I didn't put it into action, I couldn't pretend that it didn't happen. At this time, how could I calmly sleep on the same bed as Tong Tong? Even if it was just to fulfill her humble wish, I couldn't. My mind was in a mess. In the end, I didn't walk over. Instead, I smiled warmly and said to Tong Tong, "Brother has to make use of the time to cultivate at night. If you want to sleep, you can sleep by yourself." Tong Tong was stunned for a moment. She pouted and asked with a disappointed expression, But I want to hug Brother to sleep. I tried to sleep alone in the jade bracelet, but that feeling was completely different from hugging Brother to sleep. I couldn't bear to see her pitiful expression. If it was before, as long as Tong Tong showed this expression, my heart would break, and I would be willing to do anything. But this time, I only hesitated for a moment before hardening my heart. It wasn't that I didn't dote on Tong Tong, but this was a matter of principle. I had to be fair to her. I smiled as I walked over to the bed and sat down. I held Tong Tong in my arms and rubbed her head. I explained to her warmly, "When Brother promised you yesterday, I didn't think it through. Brother is an adult, and I'm already married to Red Shadow Jejia. Sleeping can only be done between husband and wife. Other people can't. So, if you want to sleep in the future, Brother can find you a super comfortable bed, but Brother can't sleep with you." Tong Tong always had a kind and soft personality. Chapter 394. A faint sobbing sound came from the quilt. In this silent night, I could hear it through the quilt. Eventually, Tong Tong was hurt. I stood by the bed and reached out my hand to comfort her. However, I didn't do anything. I just sighed. Tong Tong was born in heaven. Although she had become a ghost, she had experienced the same growth as a human. However, she wasn't a human. She had experienced the growth of her body, but she hadn't experienced the growth of her mind. This time, it was the growth of her mind. I quietly left the bed and returned to the empty space. I continued to meditate and cultivate. This time, I didn't know why, but the magic barrier in my heart disappeared. I didn't have any distracting thoughts. I easily entered the ethereal state and began to absorb the black smoke in my body. Slowly and steadily, my shaman energy grew. My shaman energy circulated 3 times in my body. When I opened my eyes, it was the next morning. I got up to check Tong Tong. However, as soon as I turned my head, I saw the little zombie sitting not far from me. He opened his big eyes and looked at me. From his expression, it seemed he had been staring at me for a long time. I felt strange. Ever since the little zombie had come out of the imperial tomb of the Shang dynasty 2 days ago, he had become very strange. His spirit hadn't developed yet, and he wasn't good with words. Now he was even quieter. For the past 2 days, he had been quietly following me. He didn't say a word. At first glance, he didn't look like a zombie at all. He didn't look like a zombie at all. Perhaps the little zombie felt my gaze, but he finally moved. He blankly turned his head to the side and didn't look at me anymore. I was puzzled. I walked over to him and asked him if he was hurt. The little zombie shook his head. He didn't want to talk to me. He even closed his eyes. The little zombie was different from Tong Tong and the snake spirit. The snake spirit and Tong Tong had stayed by my side for a very long time. The snake spirit could communicate with me through the ink dragon seal on my body. They were like my closest friends. They could communicate with me if there was anything. They couldn't be more familiar with each other. As for the little zombie, although he had been by my side for some time, I still felt a sense of unfamiliarity with him. It wasn't because the little zombie was cold and didn't want to communicate with me, but because the little zombie was very special. He was a zombie. Although he could talk, he didn't have any intelligence. He needed to go through a special awakening ceremony to gain intelligence. For a long time, I haven't opened his spirit, mainly because this kind of creature is very special. Without opening his spirit, he is the best carrier of Yin Qi. I even read in a Taoist book that after reaching the Yang spirit phase, I can practice a special kind of cultivation method that can separate a part of my Yang spirit and place it in the body of a corpse to cultivate a doppelganger. This was the reason why zombies were so precious and special. After awakening, a zombie would possess intelligence and self-awareness, thus becoming an independent entity. It could no longer be used as a carrier of Yin Qi, nor could it cultivate any clones. As we had been together for a long time, I had some feelings for the little zombie. I didn't reject the idea of opening his spirit. However, I still had a selfish thought in my heart. I thought that I might need to use him in the future. That was why I kept delaying it day by day. The path of cultivation was cruel. Cultivators didn't want to let go of any method to increase their cultivation base. It wasn't just because of selfishness. More importantly, it was because they didn't feel safe. Ordinary people might think that the stronger they were, the safer they would feel. However, the fact was that the stronger they were, the more they knew how small they were. I was no exception. After thinking for a long time, I couldn't make up my mind. I shook my head and didn't want to think about it anymore. I turned around and walked to the bed. When I reached the bed, I lowered my head and saw that Tong Tong was still under the quilt. She looked the same as last night. I thought that she was still angry. However, before I could say anything, Tong Tong lifted the quilt and jumped up from the bed. She giggled and asked me about my cultivation progress. Her face didn't look as aggrieved as last night. I was stunned, but I quickly smiled. Although I wasn't sure if she had thought it through, at least I could confirm that she hadn't changed. She was still that kind and cute Tong Tong. I rubbed her head and chatted with her for a while. Then I brought her and the little zombie to walk around the Flame God Temple. The Flame God Temple wasn't small. As I walked around with Tong Tong, I looked around the place again. Just like last time, I didn't see the fat boy's father. I didn't know if he was still here. The day passed by quickly. After nightfall, there was still no news of Tao Wu. Tong Tong didn't mention that I was going to sleep with her. She obediently lay on the bed alone. I continued to sit cross-legged in the middle of the room. That night, after the magic energy in my body had revolved a few times, I sat there and didn't hurry to cultivate. I took out the sword case that Nangong had given me and thought about what had happened. There were two main questions that were troubling me. The first was the people around me, such as Nangong. What was their motive, or what was their conspiracy? The second was my identity. The first question had been bothering me for a long time. Originally, I thought I had found the answer after I understood the nature of the battle between the witches. However, after the Yinshang royal tomb, I realized that what I had previously thought was only a part of the answer. The real answer might be much more complicated than I had imagined. Let alone the others, I couldn't understand the sword case that I was holding in my hand. This was the Xianyuan sword. Although I didn't know the power of this ancient Huaxia divine weapon, I could imagine it. If this sword was real, Nangong would be invincible with this sword. Why would he give it to me? What he was after wasn't just the battle between the witches. The second question was something that I had discovered during my trip to the Yinshang royal tomb. No matter if it was the murals or statues in the royal tomb, or the illusions that I had experienced in my half-asleep state, they all showed that I had an extraordinary past life. Of course, the term previous incarnation was just a saying that I could think of. It only represented a relationship. Whether or not it was a real previous incarnation, I wasn't sure at the moment. Originally, I was certain that the me on the murals and statues was the ancestor of the Shang dynasty. His name was Shang-Chi. However, after seeing the silver-eyed man, everything was overturned. He admitted that he was Shang-Chi, but he looked different from me. Moreover, he called me Imperial Father. This term completely confused me. Even though the term Royal Father had an ancient aura to it, it wasn't foreign to anyone. It should be how the princes in ancient times addressed their father, the emperor. But why would the silver-eyed people address me like that? I had an absurd and unimaginable feeling in my heart. I was confused. Originally, I planned to wait for Lao AI to return and ask her about the silver-eyed man in detail before thinking about this matter. However, Lao AI didn't return for 2 days. Nothing happened during the long night. I couldn't help but make wild guesses on my own. While thinking about these two questions, I unintentionally took out the piece of paper that Nangong had left on the sword box and read it again and again. Yellow Emperor, son of Xiaohao. He took the power of primal chaos and cultivated his own origin. His brother Shenong created the mountain and sea realm. Monster Emperor Jun invaded the human world. Xianyuan and Shenong joined hands to resist. Monster Emperor Jun secretly invaded the mountain and sea realm. Shenong was no match for him, so he turned into mist and sealed the world wall. Monster Emperor Jun obtained the power of primal chaos in the mountain and sea realm. Later, he borrowed the bloodline of Shenong's daughter to escape alone and invade the human world. Xianyuan was no match for him and died. Gao Xian borrowed the power of Xianyuan's sword to fuse with Monster Emperor Jun. Tong Tong, as a heavenly child, was born with extremely powerful yin qi, so much so that she could even surpass the natural chasm of life and death. She could still grow and develop with the body of a dead spirit, but everything in the world had the principle of mutual promotion and restraint. The upright and pure young heavenly thunder was her nemesis. No matter how powerful she was, under the pure yang power of the heavenly thunder, she could only turn into ashes. This was the magical part. When Tong Tong was struck by the heavenly lightning, she had turned into a yin energy silkworm cocoon to save her life. Later, she had used the black yin fluid and had given her to restore her origin little by little. No one had expected that during this process, Tong Tong could fuse the heavenly lightning with her own yin energy, creating a special heavenly thunder yin energy. According to legends, after reaching the heavenly master realm, all cultivators could find their own Tao. This Tao was the same as the path. For example, the members of the Lu family had cultivated the Lu family's magical seal since they were young. Lu Xiang's Tao was in his magical seal. Another example was Zhang Canwen. His teacher was Wen Shan's disciple, and he cultivated righteous energy. His righteous energy was his Tao. And now, Tong Tong's heavenly thunder yin energy was her Tao. Based on this, Tong Tong's current cultivation base should be very close to the heavenly master realm. To confirm this, I asked Tong Tong to use the heavenly thunder yin energy to attack me. At first, Tong Tong didn't want to. After I had explained to her the meaning of this competition, she finally nodded. She reluctantly wielded the whip that contained the heavenly thunder yin energy and aimed it at me. Since the goal was to test Tong Tong's cultivation base, I didn't dodge. I took the 5 astral steps and urged the shaman energy in my body to resist the whip. However, as soon as the whip touched my shaman energy, it smashed my shaman energy. Although the whip vanished, the power of the heavenly thunder didn't vanish. It continued to spread toward me. I was startled. I hurried to take the 6 astral steps of the 9 astral steps to block the power of the heavenly thunder. After this competition, I had a new understanding of Tong Tong's cultivation base. At first, I thought that her cultivation base was at the same level as mine. But now, it seemed she was stronger than me. The 9-star Heavenly Dipper 6 steps was basically the strongest power I could use right now, but the result was only on par with the whip that Tong Tong casually lashed out with. If she combined the power of the heavenly lightning with the divine power of the art of transcendence, it would be hard to say if I would be her opponent. It seemed Tong Tong was closer to the heavenly master realm than I was. I hurried to ask Tong Tong, "Have you completely fused with the power of the heavenly thunder?" I didn't know about it. However, it was a good thing that the father and son had reunited. Fatty wouldn't have to be so paranoid all day. I was just asking casually, but the fatty's father's face darkened. He looked at me with an unfriendly expression. "I came here to find you." Hu Zi was doing well in the Fire God Temple, but the day before yesterday, the people of the Metaphysics Society and Mount Longhu went to Fire God Temple. They said that you killed the president of the Metaphysics Society, Lu Xiang of the Lu family and Celestial Master Zhang's younger brother. They wanted to interrogate Hu Zi about your whereabouts. As he said that, the fatty's father's face darkened. He looked at me with his dim yellow eyes and continued, "At first, it was only the Metaphysics Society and Mount Longhu. They could barely suppress Jinren, but later on, the people of the Taoist Association and the Buddhist Association also came and said that you killed the president of the Taoist Association and the senior monk of the Buddhist Association. Jinren couldn't handle it anymore and had to hand Hu Zi over. Hu Zi didn't know about your situation, so how could he explain it to those people? I tried to think of a way to save Hu Zi, but the people of the metaphysics world seemed to have gone crazy. I couldn't find a chance. Third baby, tell Uncle Lin the truth. Did you really kill that many celestial masters?" Lin Aching's words made my face change again. When I had escaped from Anyang, I had guessed that the forces of the metaphysics world had misunderstood me. There hadn't been any news in the past 2 days, so I thought that the metaphysics world hadn't gone crazy. However, from what Lin Aching had said, it seemed that the people of the metaphysics world were crazier than I had imagined. They had even found the fatty. What should I do? I didn't answer his question, but asked about the fatty's current situation. Lin Aching shook his head. The situation isn't good. After the people of the Metaphysics Society captured the fatty, they didn't let him go. They even tortured him. He didn't have any other choice, so he came back to find me. The fatty's father knew a little about the relationship between me and the Fire God Temple. When he came to find me, he immediately came here and coincidentally met me. When I heard Lin Aching say that the fatty had been tortured by the people of the metaphysics world, I didn't feel good. Putting aside the fact that the fatty was a brother that I had grown up with, Lin Aching and the fatty, father and son, had gone through many hardships over the past few years. It wasn't easy for them to reunite and acknowledge each other, but something like this happened. After thinking about it, I felt sorry for them. "Uncle Lin, what should we do now? The people of the metaphysics world are looking for me. If I follow you out, will they let go of the fatty?" I asked anxiously. The fatty's father didn't say anything. He just sighed and looked like he couldn't bear it. In the end, he nodded. "I won't hide it from you. Before I came, the people from Dragon Tiger Mountain came to find me. They said that as long as you show up, they will let Hu Zi go. If you don't show up in a week, they will kill Hu Zi." My heart instantly sank. Kill. The fatty and I had been playmates since we were young. We wore the same pair of pants for as long as I could remember. Now he was going to lose his life for nothing because of me? I said without thinking, "Uncle Lin, don't worry. I'll go back with you immediately." Just as I said that, before Lin Aching could react, Tao Wu suddenly said, "No." I turned to look at Tao Wu and smiled wryly. "I know you're worried about me, but no matter what, I can't just watch as something happens to the fatty, especially because he's my best friend." While I was waiting here, I was thinking about asking Bai on what she had been up to for the past few days. But now, I didn't even think about it. My mind was filled with thoughts of saving the fatty. Tao Wu's expression was very calm. She gently shook her head at me and said, "Even though I don't know the situation, the power of the entire metaphysics world isn't something that you can handle alone. If you go out now, other than throwing your life away, what else can you do?" Hearing the concern in Tao Wu's voice, I felt increasingly bitter. I sighed and said, "Even if I throw my life away, I can at least save the fatty. This matter started because of me. If someone has to die, it can only be me." Tao Wu seemed to hear the determination in my words. After being silent for a while, she suddenly asked me, "I remember you told me that you have an inky changing pearl?" I was stunned and nodded subconsciously. Tao Wu continued, The inky changing pearl can conceal one's aura and change one's appearance. If you really want to save him, there's no harm in getting those people to let him go first. After that, you can use the inky changing pearl to escape. I didn't understand what she meant and asked, use the inky changing pearl to escape? However, the inky changing pearl can only change one's appearance. Among the people waiting for me, there must be a large number of celestial masters. What's the use of changing one's appearance? Hearing my words, Tao Wu's expression was a little strange. She asked me to take the inky changing pearl out for her to see. Lao Ai held the shifting ink bead in his hand and looked at it for a while before he shook his head and said, "This shifting ink bead is only a semi-finished product. As long as it is transformed into a finished product, it will have the effect of concealing one's aura. Even a heavenly master would not be able to see through it. Not only that, the shifting ink bead itself is a life-saving magic tool. Each shifting ink bead can only be used once to save one's life." Chapter 397. My heart was filled with excitement, but I immediately realized that Lao Ai was talking about the finished EMO bead, not the semi-finished one in my hands. No matter how powerful it was, it had nothing to do with me. I smiled wryly. When I got the MO bead from the MO family, it was already a semi-finished product. Those people only gave me a week's time. They wouldn't have enough time to go to the MO family to find the real EMO bead. I think we should forget about it. Saving people is more important. I wasn't stupid, although I wanted to take the fatty's place and suffer. I didn't want to die in vain, if I could save my own life. But Uncle Lin said that the people from Mount Longhu only gave me a week's time. He must have already spent 1 or 2 days on his way here. If we went to the descendants of the MO family in Macau, even if we got the MO bead, I'm afraid we wouldn't have enough time to save people. After saying that, I didn't care about the presence of the fatty's father and directly stepped forward to hug Lao Ai. Saying goodbye to her, Lao Ai dodged to the side and avoided my hug. Then, without waiting for me to react, she directly reached out to me and asked, "Do you still have the profound Yin liquid I gave you last time?" I was stunned. I didn't understand what she meant, and subconsciously took out the small bottle of profound Yin liquid and handed it to her, replying, "There's still about half a bottle." Lao Ai nodded and softly said, "It should be enough." After saying that, she reached out again and said to me, "Take out your semi-finished EMO bead as well." After getting the EMO bead, she reached behind her and took out a small white porcelain bowl from who knows where. She directly threw the EMO bead inside, then opened the small bottle's cap and poured half of the profound Yin liquid into the small porcelain bowl. After seeing her actions, I vaguely understood what she meant and asked in surprise, "You can turn this EMO bead into a finished product?" Lao Ai carefully placed the white porcelain bowl on the stone bench, then nodded to me, "Yes." I really guessed it. I immediately became excited and said to Lao Ai with a grin, "That's great. Why didn't you tell me earlier?" Lao Ai seemed to be angered by my words, glanced at me, and replied snappily, "Who told you to be in such a hurry, getting ready to leave before I even finished talking? Where would I have the time to tell you?" The usually cold and silent Lao Ai suddenly made such a reproachful expression. It had a special charm, and I was momentarily dazed, unable to say anything for a long time. Thinking back, I realized that ever since I returned to the Fire God Temple, Swanee seemed to be completely different from before. In the past, when she spoke, she would be expressionless. Now that she was talking more, the liveliness in her expressions and words seemed to be getting stronger, as though she was slowly adapting to her surroundings. In the past, Lao Ai was noble and ethereal, like a fairy in a painting. Although I liked her very much, every time I looked at her, it was unreal. It was as if I was looking at a fairy in the sky. Even if she was my wife, I didn't dare to have the slightest thought of profaning her. But at this moment, I suddenly felt that the distance between us had decreased by a lot. It wasn't just the distance between us, but the distance between us. She seemed to have suddenly descended from the clouds and stood in front of me with a smile. In reality, she was indeed standing in front of me and was extremely close to me. I didn't know what I was thinking, but I suddenly stretched my head out and kissed her on the cheek. At this moment, Lao AI seemed to be preparing to say something, but after being suddenly kissed by me, her mouth instantly froze. The trace of hidden bitterness on her face instantly disappeared, and a crimson cloud floated onto her face, making her originally extremely beautiful look even more indescribable. Looking at her, I was intoxicated and couldn't wait to pull her into my embrace. But since Lin Aching was still here, I didn't have the nerve to go over and hug Lao AI, but I still looked at her with infatuation. Lao AI wasn't as thick-skinned as me and had already lowered her head. After staying silent for a while, she frantically picked up the white jade porcelain bowl that she had just placed on the stone bench and passed it to my hand. Avoiding my gaze, she softly said, "As long as you soak it for a night and use a drop of your blood to nourish it, this EMO pearl will become a real EMO pearl. We shouldn't stay here for long. Let's head back first." After saying that, she turned around and quickly walked back to her residence. Seeing her suddenly reveal the appearance of a little girl, I was both happy and amused. Carrying the white jade porcelain bowl, I followed her with Lin Aching. This place wasn't far from Lao AI's residence, and after walking for a while, we approached the stone room that she lived in. Right at this moment, Lin Aching, who had been standing next to me in silence, suddenly spoke. "Third baby." I was stunned and stopped walking. I turned to look at Lin Aching's solemn face, thinking that he had most likely seen the scene of me kissing Lao AI and wanted to persuade me that humans and ghosts were different paths. Lin Aching was my elder, and he had watched me grow up. If he really wanted to persuade me, I really didn't know how to reply. While I was hesitating, Lin Aching finally spoke. He sighed. "Don't let her down." After saying that, he immediately lifted his foot and walked into the stone room in front of us. I was stunned on the spot, a little dumbfounded by his words. Lin Aching's cultivation base might not be as high as mine, but his knowledge of metaphysics was definitely not worse than mine. The saying that humans and ghosts walk different paths was a golden rule for us metaphysicians. Everyone knew that if a human and a ghost stayed together, they wouldn't have a good ending. I really didn't expect that Lin Aching would give his blessing to me, and hua. After my parents had passed away, I didn't have any relatives. Of course, I didn't regret marrying Lao AI, and other people's opinions didn't matter to me. However, after seeing Lin Aching today, I was a little worried. But now, it seemed that Uncle Lin supported me, and Lao AI. The corners of my mouth curved into a smile, and I didn't worry anymore. I lifted my foot and walked into the stone room. Tong Tong was circling around Lao AI, asking her where she had been these days. Lao AI also smiled and talked to her. Seeing this, I heaved a sigh of relief. A few days ago, when Lao AI left, her face didn't look right. I thought that she had something against Tong Tong. Now, it seemed that I was overthinking. The two of them smiled and talked to each other, and they looked like a pair of sisters. They couldn't be more intimate. Lin Aching stood next to the little zombie, frowning and gazing at him. I put down the porcelain bowl in my hand and walked to Lin Aching. When he saw me, he asked, "Did you raise this little zombie?" I nodded, but before I could answer, Lin Aching said, "It's strange. It looks like an ordinary raised zombie, but why has it seen energy so strong?" Hearing his words, I was slightly shocked. Ghouls were different from Tong Tong's heavenly birth ghost infant. Heavenly birth's miraculousness could be seen at a glance by those who had cultivated to a certain realm. However, ghouls were different, especially those that had yet to awaken their spirits. They looked no different from normal zombies. Even if a heavenly teacher were to casually look at them, he wouldn't be able to see any clues. It was also the reason why the heavenly masters hadn't paid attention to the little zombie in the imperial tomb of the Shang dynasty. Lin Aching's cultivation base wasn't bad, but he hadn't reached the heavenly master realm yet. How could he see that there was something strange about the little zombie? I felt strange, but Lin Aching was someone I trusted. I didn't want to hide it from him. I smiled and answered, "He's not an ordinary raised zombie. He's a ghoul." "A ghoul?" Lin Aching was surprised. Then he frowned. It's normal for a ghoul to have such a huge amount of yin energy. However, a ghoul's yin energy should be pure. However, I can smell an ancient aura from this little zombie. Something's not right. Ancient aura. Instinctively, I sniffed and couldn't help but laugh. I didn't know what Lin Aching meant. Lin Aching frowned and pondered for a while. He didn't want to dwell on this issue anymore. He shook his head and said, "Perhaps it's just my misperception. Let's not talk about this. Tonight, I will meditate outside the stone chamber. Tomorrow morning, when the e-ink bead is ready, we will depart. What do you think?" No matter what, Fatty is still my brother. Even if he really betrayed me, I have to see it with my own eyes to believe it. Therefore, I have to go on this trip. After making up my mind, I discarded all other distracting thoughts and no longer let my imagination run wild. Lao AI also didn't try to persuade me. She just gently urged me to sleep early. She said that it was getting late and that we would have to travel far tomorrow, so I had to rest well today. Hearing her mention sleep, my heart trembled slightly. However, I immediately suppressed that thought. Originally, I thought that I would have to stay here for a period of time. Lao AI and I were already husband and wife in name, so it was only natural for us to be husband and wife. However, now that I had to go on an adventure again, I couldn't stay with her forever. Thus, that thought faded. Thus, I went over and laid on the bed. Lao AI didn't say anything. Just like when I was in middle school, she laid beside me gently. She didn't say anything and just silently accompanied me. Back then, facing Lao AI, I was more or less afraid. Even though I could sleep normally after getting used to it, I was still on tenterhooks every night. Thinking back to that period of time, my heart was filled with warmth and nostalgia. Back then, I didn't know that Lao AI's spirit body couldn't sleep at all. So back then, she only accompanied me night after night, quietly watching me sleep. Perhaps it was because of this long period of companionship that I didn't have much resistance in my heart when she called me her husband. Thinking back to those things back then, I turned to look at Lao AI, who looked exactly the same as back then. There was an inexplicable warmth in my heart. I couldn't help but reach out and embrace her. Lao AI's body was as cold as back then, but I felt very warm. Hugging her, I closed my eyes and soon fell into a deep sleep. When I woke up the next day, Lao AI was already standing by the bed with my coat in her hand. After I got off the bed, she gently helped me put on my clothes. Then she handed the EMO bead to me. Smiling, she said to me, "Husband, the EMO bead has been refined." I took it and looked at it. The EMO bead, which was originally the size of a fist, was still black. However, its color was much deeper. There seemed to be a gray aura circulating inside, making it look somewhat gloomy. In addition, the EMO bead had shrunk by more than half. At this moment, it was only the size of a ping-pong ball. Lao AI told me that the method to use the completed EMO bead was the same as the semi-finished EMO bead. It only needed to be driven by Tao Qi. However, the amount of Tao Qi needed was much more than before. I nodded and held the completed EMO bead. I circulated the Tao Qi in my body to give it a try. Lao AI was right. I used the same amount of Tao Qi to drive the semi-finished EMO bead. In the end, the EMO bead didn't have the slightest reaction. I could only continue to pour in Tao Qi. Only after I had used up all of my Tao Qi did I faintly feel a slight tremble in the EMO bead. I lowered my head to take a look. The gray aura in the EMO bead had already filled the entire bead. Furthermore, it was constantly revolving within the bead, as though it would rush out at any moment. This time, I was a little dumbfounded. My Tao Qi had encountered a heavenly barrier. I could only stop at the 10th level of sealing acupoint, unable to step into glory of knowledge. With the miraculous EMO bead, it could only be driven by Tao Qi at the glory of knowledge realm. It was almost unimaginable. However, the problem was that the Tao Qi in my body was just a sliver away from reaching glory of knowledge. Even after exhausting all of my Tao Qi, I could only push the EMO bead to the critical point. Lao AI stood at the side. She had clearly seen through my situation. She didn't ask any questions. She just smiled and passed the jade bracelet back to me. The Tao Qi to drive the EMO bead doesn't have to be poured in all at once. I can help you lock the Tao Qi in the EMO bead. After you use the true dragon vein in the jade bracelet to replenish your Tao Qi, you only need to pour in a small amount of Tao Qi to activate the EMO bead. From then on, you only need to borrow the true dragon vein in the jade bracelet to maintain the supply of Tao Qi. If you use the life-saving function of the EMO bead, you don't need to use the Tao technique to coordinate with it. All you need is a thought, and the EMO bead will automatically activate. However, husband must remember that the life-saving function of the EMO bead can only be used once. After that, the EMO bead will no longer have this function. After saying that, she took the EMO bead. After forming a few hand seals, she passed it back to me. I took a look at it. Sure enough, there was a layer of Tao Qi circulating around the EMO bead. It seemed to be bound by some invisible power. It could only float around the EMO bead and was unable to dissipate. Lao AI naturally wouldn't lie to me, so I didn't try it again. I directly put the EMO bead and jade bracelet into my pocket. Afterwards, I asked her, previously I used the semi-finished EMO bead to change my appearance. However, I was recognized by a few people from the Metaphysics Association. If I change my appearance again, I'm afraid that I'll be in danger if I meet people from the Metaphysics Association. I don't know if the appearance of the completed EMO bead will be the same as before. Lao AI shook her head. Husband, don't worry. The semi-finished EMO bead will only change your appearance slightly. The completed EMO bead can change your appearance completely. Husband doesn't need to worry. This time, the last of my worries were gone. I laughed heartily and prepared to say goodbye to Lao AI. However, as the words reached the tip of my tongue, I couldn't maintain the smile on my face. I couldn't help but feel apologetic in my heart. Lao AI had been guarding the fire god temple all year round. She had lived the life of an ancient scroll. It wasn't easy for her to wait for me to come back. But after a few days, I had to leave again. At that time, when I said that I would come back once every half a year, I didn't feel that there was anything wrong with it. But after I really did it, I realized that it was actually a very cruel thing. The outside world had my own grievances. Thus, I couldn't completely break away from the outside world and return here. Lao AI was only a small part of my world, but to Lao AI, I was her entire world. I didn't know why Lin Aching had advised me not to let Lao AI down yesterday. But now, I couldn't help but have this thought in my heart. Chapter 399. Looking at Bai, and I moved my mouth, but I didn't know what to say. In the end, I could only apologize to her and promise her that I would come back as soon as I finished dealing with the matters outside. Bai, and still smiled and said softly to me, "Husband, you don't have to be like this. I only hope that husband can be safe and happy outside. That's enough. As for the mundane matters, they will be dealt with one day. Husband, you don't have to be impatient." Her understanding made me feel ashamed. I couldn't help but hold her hand and softly said, "Bai, and you're so nice." Originally, this was just a display of my true feelings, but for some reason, the faint smile on Lao AI's face faded a little. Her eyes dimmed a little as she looked at me in a daze. After a long time, she sighed and said, "I only hope that my husband will remember my kindness in the future." There was a trace of resentment in her voice. I was surprised, as I didn't know why she said that. When I was about to ask, Bayan pointed at the door and whispered, "Lin Aching is waiting for you. Don't let him wait too long." I turned around and saw Uncle Lin standing at the door. He was looking at us. With Lin Aching there, and I couldn't talk too much. I let go of her hand and said goodbye to her one last time before turning around and leaving. When I reached the door, Uncle Lin and the little zombie had been waiting for me for a long time. I called them and left. The Fire God Temple was located in the western border of Hubei. It wasn't far from Kaifeng, where the diviner faction was located. Uncle Lin was very anxious on the way. When we reached Shenangjia, he rented a car and took me and the little zombie to Kaifeng. On the way, I thought that when we arrived at the diviner faction, we would have to use the Moe bead's life-saving skill to escape from the people from Longhu Mountain. At that time, I wouldn't have time to take care of the little zombie. Thus, I planned to rent a car and take the little zombie back to the shop in Shenzhen. However, after I told the little zombie, he shook his head at me. I was surprised. The little zombie had always been ignorant and had never resisted my orders. What was wrong with him this time? Before I could figure it out, the little zombie pointed at the map on the bus. "Please take me to a place dozens of kilometers away from here. I'll wait for you there." I didn't understand. I frowned and thought for a while. "Where do you want to go?" The little zombie's face didn't reveal anything strange. He honestly replied, "The Inchi there is very rich. It's suitable for me to cultivate." I understood. Although the little zombie had an innate spirit body, no matter how good his innate aptitude was, he still needed to cultivate to increase his cultivation base. Ordinary zombies would come out to absorb the essence of the moon during the night of the full moon. The little zombie had been following me and hadn't cultivated much. Chapter 400. I turned to look at Uncle Lin as my mind raced. After a moment of silence, I lifted my head and said to the chubby heavenly master, "Of course, I can't bring that woman here directly, but don't worry. As long as you let Lin Hu go, I'll definitely hand her over." I was obviously just spouting nonsense, but that was the only thing I could say. If the people from Mount Longhu knew the truth, not only would they let the fatty go, they would probably kill me and the fatty to vent their anger. When Uncle Lin heard what I said, he was slightly surprised and turned to look at me. The chubby heavenly master's expression turned solemn as he asked me, "You hit her?" I shook my head. "You don't have to worry about that. Let him go first." I thought that the people from Mount Longhu wouldn't let the matter go so easily. However, the chubby heavenly master waved his hand, and the fatty's body suddenly flew up and landed in front of Uncle Lin and me. Immediately after, the chubby heavenly master's voice was heard. I can let him go first, but don't think that you won't dare. After Lynn, who leaves, if you don't hand over the key immediately, I guarantee that you'll wish you were dead. After saying that, I didn't know what he did, but the fatty, who was originally lying on the ground like a log, suddenly jumped up. He anxiously shouted at me, "Third baby, why did you come here? They won't let you go." And before he could finish, Lin Aching extended his hand and grabbed him. With a solemn expression, he said to me, "Third baby, I'll leave this place to you. Let's go first." After saying that, he didn't ask for Fatty's opinion. He pulled Fatty along and dashed outside. During the entire process, the fatty seemed to be anxious to say something. However, he didn't know why, but when he opened his mouth, he couldn't make a sound, just like when he was being controlled by the chubby heavenly master. After Lin Aching and the fatty's silhouettes disappeared from the Tiani monastery, the fat, great heavenly master, who was sitting in the main hall, got up from his chair and leisurely walked in front of me. He casually knocked the jade tablet in his hand on the round pillar beside me. "Tell me, where is the exact location of the key?" I shook my head. "I'll tell you after they're safe." The chubby, great, heavenly master didn't get angry. He lifted his head to look outside the room. Then he waved the jade tablet in front of me. Instantly, a gray screen appeared in front of me. Uncle Lin and the chubby man's silhouettes were displayed on it. The two of them had reached the entrance of Mount Huangguanshan and were hurrying to leave. No one from Mount Longhu had stopped them during the whole process. I watched as the two of them left Mount Huangguanshan. Then they got into a car and sped away. When their figures disappeared, the chubby, great, heavenly master waved the jade tablet in his hand again. The gray screen disappeared. The chubby, great, heavenly master asked, "How is it? Can you tell me now?" I nodded and let out a breath. As I gathered the Tao Qi in my body into the ink pearl, I smiled at the fat master and said, "Actually, I don't know where that woman went." Not only that, but of the 18 masters in the Yinshang royal tomb, other than Lu Xiang, I didn't kill any of them. The deaths of the 3 masters from Longhu Mountain had nothing to do with me. If you believe me, then believe me. If you don't, then I can't do anything about it. After I said that, I didn't wait for him to react. I gathered all my Tao Qi and poured it into the shifting ink bead. Then I quickly activated the shifting ink bead's life-saving ability. The 3 heavenly masters of Longhu Mountain were standing in front of me. Even though I was secretly using the EMO bead's special ability, I didn't dare to show the slightest neglect or delay. It could be seen that the fat heavenly master and the other 2 heavenly masters were unable to react to this sudden turn of events. They only stared at me in shock. After I activated the EMO bead's life-saving ability, my body rapidly faded. At the same time, there was an enormous force tearing at my body. When the 3 heavenly masters from Longhu Mountain saw this scene, the astonishment in their eyes rapidly turned into shock, followed by anger. The fat heavenly master seemed to have finally come to his senses. He slapped the jade tablet in his hand against his own chest. Immediately afterward, he spat out a mouthful of blood toward me. I had a bad premonition and tried to dodge to the side, but under the effect of the EMO bead, my body couldn't move at all. I could only stare blankly as the blood mist rained down on my head. Immediately after, I felt a tearing pain in my body. It was similar to the feeling I had when Nangong, Yi Pianpian, and Yi Yaolon had joined hands to send me to the Fire God Temple at the back mountain of the Metaphysics Association. I didn't know if it was because of the shifting ink bead or because of the fat heavenly master's mouthful of blood. After the tearing pain, my body became almost transparent. Immediately after, My vision went black, and I fainted just like the previous time. When I woke up, my body was aching so much that I couldn't open my eyelids. However, my vigilance made me clench my teeth and open my eyes. As I looked around, I tried my best to circulate the shaman energy in my body. Before I could feel the shaman energy in my body, I saw a figure in front of me. I was startled. Lao AI had told me that the shifting ink bead could teleport me to a random location 1,000 miles away. There was a lot of uncertainty. If I teleported to a dangerous place with my current condition, it was hard to say whether I would be in danger or not. However, my fear didn't show too much. It immediately turned into astonishment. The figure in front of me was the little zombie. Chapter 402. Will never harm me? The evil sacrificial spirits. Words stunned me. Back in Shenzhen, when the evil sacrificial spirit had touched my face, I'd felt that something was wrong. Later on, I'd agreed to go to the Yinshang Royal Mausoleum to find out the truth. Now that he'd said it himself, I understood that my feeling wasn't wrong. But why would he do that? I kept silent for a while before asking, "Who are you? Why will you never harm me?" The little zombie, or rather the sacrificial evil spirit, raised his head. Perhaps it was because he was no longer hiding his identity. His eyes were filled with a layer of mist, and they looked almost the same as before. The only difference was that his eyes were now hidden in his eye sockets, and they looked a lot smaller. He looked at me with his large eyes and asked in a deep voice, "Who am I?" "My identity. Your previous guesses weren't wrong. I am the sacrificial spirit of the spring sacrifice hall. 1,000 years ago, I was summoned from the mansion of hell and then suppressed. None of this is wrong. But besides this identity, I have another identity. Another identity? The little zombie didn't wait for me to ask and quickly continued. My other identity involves too many secrets. I can't tell you for now. Nangong and Tao Wu both knew a lot, but they couldn't tell me for now. Now, even the evil sacrificial spirit said the same thing. I thought that he didn't know that I already knew my identity in my previous life. I immediately said, "If it involves my previous life, you can tell me. I already know that my previous life's identity is related to Emperor Ku, one of the 5 emperors. What else can't you tell me?" Oh, the little zombie turned to look at me in bewilderment. However, he quickly shook his head. "My identity is indeed related to your past life. However, it's different from what you think. Now isn't the time for you to know." Hearing that, I was instantly discouraged. I was even more confused. Although I hadn't fully understood my previous life's identity, it should be my biggest secret. Why did the evil sacrificial spirit insist on not revealing anything? I wanted to ask more questions, but the sacrificial evil spirit raised his hand and interrupted me. "We don't have much time left. Don't ask any more questions. Take a good rest. We have to depart in 5 minutes. Looking at the situation, he really didn't want to explain to me. Feeling helpless, I could only stop asking and continue to adjust my breathing according to his words. However, the shaman energy in my body had already filled up, so adjusting my breathing wouldn't be of much use. In addition, I was curious. After circulating the shaman energy in my body a few times, I stopped and continued to ask the evil sacrificial spirit, "You are very powerful. In the Yinshang royal tomb, so many heavenly masters combined weren't your match. Now, there are only 3 heavenly masters from the heavenly master sect chasing after us. Can't you defeat them?" The little zombie shook his head. That day, when I fought against those heavenly masters, I was severely injured. Then my soul was forcefully sucked out by the soul-stabilizing stone. Over the past 1,000 years, I've been cultivating that broken body. Now that I've lost my body, I don't have any power left. I can only use the Yin energy in this corpse. According to your human power classification, I'm only at the glorious consciousness realm. I suddenly felt extremely guilty. I was the one who had used the soul-stabilizing stone to forcefully suck out his soul. Moreover, judging from the evil sacrificial spirit's attitude towards me, it was possible that he still had some power left. He just didn't want to attack me. That was why I almost killed him. It was said that everything was destined by God. Who would have thought that the choice I had made back then would harm me? If the evil sacrificial spirit still had his original power, I wouldn't have to worry about the 3 heavenly masters chasing after us. While I was thinking about this, the little zombie suddenly stood up from the ground. His eyes looked behind us for a while. Then he raised his voice and shouted, "Those heavenly masters are chasing after us. Let's go." Then he grabbed my arm. He didn't even wait for me to urge the shaman energy in my body. He directly pulled me and flew far away. After running for around 1 minute, I finally managed to urge the shaman energy in my body. Slowly, I got used to his speed. I couldn't help but criticize him. The evil sacrificial spirit had just said that the only power he could use was the Yin energy in the little zombie's body, which was around the glorious consciousness realm. He was at the glorious consciousness realm, and I was also at the glorious consciousness realm. Moreover, I was at the peak of the glorious consciousness realm. Logically speaking, the shaman energy in my body should be stronger than his. However, from what I had just seen, he was stronger than me. Moreover, he was much stronger than me. This discovery puzzled me a lot. Since I had started cultivating, no matter if it was cultivation techniques or magical tools, I had always been at the top. Within the same realm, I had never met a worthy opponent. Even the genius disciples of the metaphysical families weren't as good as me. But now, the evil sacrificial spirit had completely overturned my view. I really wanted to know why it was like this. However, I couldn't ask him while running. I could only bury this question in my heart. I planned to ask him the next time I stopped to rest. This time, the running wasn't much different from the last time. After around 1 hour, the little zombie finally stopped right before the shaman energy in my body was drained. After the first time, my condition was better. I wasn't as distressed as the first time. However, I still slumped on the ground. I had to gasp for air for a few minutes before I could calm down. The little zombie didn't talk nonsense with me. Just like the last time, he asked me to restore my power. I didn't dare to linger. I sat cross-legged and used the black energy in my veins of the sky to quickly replenish my shaman energy. Around 10 minutes later, after I had replenished my shaman energy, I opened my eyes. I was a little worried. Although I had successfully avoided the pursuit of the 3 celestial masters from Longhu Mountain with the help of the little zombie, there was a time when all power was exhausted. No matter how powerful the evil sacrificial spirit was, it could only use the cultivation of the glorious consciousness realm. Moreover, even if he could endure it, I wasn't sure if I could. I had used the black energy in my veins of the sky to replenish my shaman energy. That was why I was able to recover so quickly. However, I didn't have much black energy left. If I relied on myself to replenish my shaman energy, let alone 10 minutes, I wouldn't even be able to recover my shaman energy in 1 hour. At that time, I would become a burden to the little zombie. I couldn't help but feel angry. Several hours ago, on Mount Huangguanshan, before I used the E-bead to escape, I had told the heavenly master from Mount Longhu everything that had happened in the imperial tomb of the Shang dynasty. However, he didn't believe me. Blaming me for the deaths of those celestial masters is already a huge injustice. Now, they even want to find the lost woman from me. Longhu Mountain's way of doing things is really going too far. However, what could I do? The situation was stronger than me. Mount Longhu was too powerful. I didn't have a chance to reason with him. I could only linger at death's door to save my life. At this moment, the little zombie next to me opened his eyes. I wanted to ask him if he had some secret technique to use his glorious consciousness realming energy to exert such power. However, before I could open my mouth, the little zombie furrowed his brows. He grabbed my arm one more time. After we had flown far away, he explained to me, "Those people are coming again." While trying to move my body, I turned my head to look behind me. I didn't know if it was the people from Dragon Tiger Mountain chasing us or not. However, a few kilometers behind us, there were indeed a few people who looked like black dots dashing toward us. I ran and stopped like that for the entire night. When the next morning arrived, I didn't even know where I was. My mind was muddled, and I only knew that I was trying my best to control the shaman energy in my body to run for my life. And now, the situation that I was worried about had finally happened. There was only a thin layer of the black aura left in my veins of the heavens. It was no longer enough for me to quickly convert it into shaman chi. However, perhaps it was because we had changed our direction this time, but the heavenly master who was chasing us was left far behind. The next time we stopped to adjust our breathing, we had a longer time to rest. Relying on this opportunity, the little zombie and I were able to take a breather. Finally, we managed to reach the foothills of Taihang Mountain. The corpse sect was hidden in the depths of Taihang Mountain. The two of us had to use the 800 miles of Taihang Mountain to hide. We had to use the last wisp of energy in our bodies to reach the mountain area where the corpse sect was located. Although I had made it, I had almost collapsed during the last part of the journey. If it weren't for the Xian Yin fluid that the red shadow had given me, I wouldn't have been able to endure it. Even so, I had used up all the power in my body during the last part of the journey. I had to use my life force to keep going. I had to hit my chest as hard as I could. The evil sacrificial spirit was even worse off. Not only had he used up all the yin chi in the little zombie's body, but he had also used a secret technique to convert the little zombie's body into yin chi for his own use. That was how he had managed to hold on. When I saw the exit of the secret passage that Yen Nantian and I had used to escape from the corpse sect, my body went soft. I couldn't endure it anymore and directly fell to the ground. At this moment, I didn't even have the strength to open my mouth to breathe. My chest heaved up and down as I tried to take a few more breaths. However, I couldn't open my mouth. The little zombie's situation was even worse than mine. He had to take care of me along the way. At this moment, he was also lying on the ground, completely unconscious. There was not a single part of his body that wasn't covered in scars left behind by the evil sacrificial spirit's secret technique. I lay motionless on the ground for a few minutes. When I could move my arm, I clenched my teeth and punched myself in the chest. I spat out a mouthful of blood. My body regained some strength, but I still couldn't stand up. I didn't want to stand up anymore. I crawled on all fours and opened the secret passage that Yen Nantian had left behind. After the passage was opened, I had used up all of my energy. However, there was only one step left. I gritted my teeth and endured the dizziness in my head and the pain in my body. I crawled back and pulled the little zombie's body. At the same time, I took one step at a time to rest and move him into the cave. You're tuning in to the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.